Hey folks, Joe Valley here, along with Deanna Berardi. Welcome to another episode of the Quiet Life Podcast. As in the past month, this podcast is sponsored by My Amazon Guy. I know the founder, Stephen Pope, personally. We've had lots of clients that have a tremendous amount of success with them. You can learn almost anything you want to about how to grow your Amazon business through Stephen's YouTube channel, My Amazon Guy. If you need someone to help you level up your PPC, SEO design, manage your Amazon catalog, whatever it might be, check him out at myamazonguy.com. Now, today's podcast, again, co-hosted with Deanna Berardi. Hi, Deanna. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Fantastic. So you and I just had the opportunity to talk to Ahmed Raza from Rapid Diligence, talking about the importance of hiring a due diligence firm when you buy an online business. How do you think that call went? What are folks going to hear in the next 30 minutes?
It's pretty awesome. I mean, he talks about some of the obvious things, which is, don't think you know it all. Definitely outsource that expertise. But he talks a little bit about what can happen if you have the wrong due diligence partner and how you could actually lose a deal that you have on the hook that might have been a great deal that you lost because somebody else derailed your due diligence. Plus, he can also talk about the other big problem that can happen, which is when you simply just buy the wrong business or overpay for an existing business. So I think he just talked about a lot of pitfalls to avoid.
And one of the things that he will tell you folks are what to look for, where things are wrong in a profit and loss statement, where it's not necessarily done intentionally, but mistakes that are generally made and where to find them that could cost you some money if you don't find them. I think the due diligence pays for itself. And one of the things that we talk about in there, and I've seen over the last decade, is that, a good due diligence firm like Rapid Diligence will tell you not only what's wrong with the business, but highlight the areas that you can change fairly quickly to get some instant scale. So let's jump to it. Ahmed Raza from Rapid Diligence talking about how to safely buy an online business. Here we go. Ahmed, welcome to the Quiet Life Podcast. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Glad you're here. We're going to talk about due diligence and the do's and don'ts of that process and the reason folks should pay attention to it, what you guys do over at Rapid Diligence. Can you give the audience a bit of a background on yourself first, though?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of got into this space almost 8-9 years ago at this point. I started off with buying a few online businesses myself, right? So this was primarily e-commerce businesses, SaaS content, kind of all the good stuff. I did that for a few years, both with personal capital and then on behalf of investors. And then I went on and started a small cap private equity fund where, again, the focus was on e-commerce businesses, SaaS content, primarily online businesses. Ended up exiting the fund and started doing private equity consulting. So helping various PE funds and search funds with their due diligence process. And after that, kind of like most people, I was like, hey, I kind of want to do this for myself. So I started Rapid Diligence a couple of years back and have been mostly focused on buy-side due diligence process for online acquisitions. So most of the businesses we look at are anywhere from under $1 million all the way to 20, 30, $40 million. And we usually step in when an LOI is executed. So we do that buy-side due diligence, that exclusive due diligence period.
Yeah, I was just going to address the timing of it. I think it's important to do it when under LOI as well. At Quiet Life, for the last decade or more, we've been referring folks out. So excited to have the team listen to the podcast, learn more about Rapid Diligence, and refer folks out to you as well. And one of the ways you can actually find Rapid Diligence, guys, you can just go to rapiddiligence.com. But if you go to the Quiet Life/partners page, we've got a link there that you can click as well, learn more about what he does. Deanna, you said you had a question here that you wanted to jump in and ask of Ahmed.
Yeah, I have a really good one for you, Ahmed. You ready for me?
Okay, absolutely.
At Quiet Light, every time we close one of our deals, we actually do an internal debrief. And the advisor does a deep dive on what a lesson learned might have been from a closed deal, so that they can pass it on to one of the other 14 advisors on their team. And the concept is we all learn, right from each other. And so when there's a mistake that's made or something that could have been done differently, let's talk about it, let's process it, and let's share it out so that every Quiet Light advisor is growing in knowledge and expertise with every deal that's closed at Quiet Light. So we had an advisor who sold the SaaS deal recently. I'm going to keep all the names out. It was an advisor that sold the SaaS business. It was a health and wellness niche software business that was $420,000 in deal size. It was a good multiple at 4x. And the big lesson that this advisor learned was the importance of getting the buyer, who was the first one under that LOI, to plan their due diligence process on the technical aspects of the business, especially around evaluating the software code. Because this first buyer, they loved the guy. He went out and he hired somebody that wasn't with Rapid Due Diligence. And that technical expert totally derailed the deal because they just drove the technical due diligence aspect like into this weird rabbit hole. And it actually disenfranchised the seller and the advisor. And so that buyer was just like, oh, I thought I hired someone that was going to do this right for me, and had rabbit holed. And then the buyer was like a little bit, pushed back on because the advisor, a quiet light, and the seller found themselves defending themselves against this kind of misinformed now buyer who was really misinformed. So then somebody else, they lost that LOI. And then now there's another buyer that came in, and that buyer closed. They had a much better due diligence process and they closed the deal. What would you say to that first buyer that hired the wrong technical expert and or tried to do it themselves and just ended up derailing a really good deal and actually lost the deal because of that?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent kind of scenario and a question. So I think the thing that I tell a lot of buyers, especially when it comes to technical due diligence, is that it looks very different when you're doing technical due diligence for a business you're looking to acquire. Like the objective and goals look very different than if you're doing technical due diligence, for example, if you're looking to start like essentially take over a project, right? And so when I say that, I mean, when you're buying a business and you want to do technical due diligence, the importance is always around the processes, right? So I'll have buyers tell me, hey, like, have you reviewed every single line of code? And the answer to that is that's almost impossible, right? But what we review the overall code, the overarching code, and the infrastructure. But the main objective there is to understand that, hey, if you as a buyer take over this business, are those processes in place that the buyer has, are those going to serve you well when you decide to kind of enhance the software and whatnot? So to emphasize that a little bit more, what we look at how many developers are on the team, right? Like who has the ability to push into production? How are their release processes like? Is this all living in the head of the developer themselves? Like, are they going and pushing code into production by themselves? Or do they have processes in place that when someone takes over the business, those processes will kind of serve as a fail-safe? So I think that that's always important to look at the business from, even when you're doing technical due diligence, look at it from an acquisition perspective, because that's going to look very different than, hey, if you're just trying to rabbit hole into something, like there's always going to be things wrong with code. And I have a software engineering background, so I've actually written code, I've done development, and there's no perfect software out there, right? And anyone that's written code long enough will tell you that code, like software, will always have bugs. It'll always have complexities. What you really want to figure out is what those risks are, and are those complexities and bugs acceptable, as well as like once you take over, is that going to serve you well as a new buyer? So I understand exactly the scenario you've described, because it's something that if you're just someone with just a software engineering background, but you've never bought a software business, your perspective is going to look very different, because you're going to try to figure out everything that's wrong with the business and present it for a lot bigger than it is. When a lot of times, a lot of the issues we catch, we say, hey, here's the risk and here's how you can fix it, right? This business doesn't have proper release processes, but you can implement this once you buy it. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I love that aspect of it, because it's a rope. What people learn most often in due diligence, if everything in the financial side works out and the coding and whatever, depending upon the kind of site, what they learn are what's wrong with it and how to fix it and scale it because they fixed it and implemented better SOPs or better processes. And I think that's an important part of due diligence that people don't know they're getting, right? There's a lot of information in a report that may come out and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. The key thing is that now you know what's wrong. The seller didn't know that, and you could fix it and scale your business higher. What would you say, Ahmed, is some of the top one or two mistakes that buyers make when they're, or red flags for them to look at as they're analyzing a business?
Yeah, it's a great one. So are we talking from a technical perspective or just overall?
Just overall.
Sure. So I think one of the things I always say, especially to first-time buyers, is that a lot of buyers get obsessed with validation of revenue. Now, I know that's important and I'm not discounting that, but the way I always look at it is that when you're buying an online business, validation of revenue is a relatively simple process, right? Because we're not dealing with, a corner store that they're taking cash or a laundromat or anything like that. Virtually everything's recorded. That's easy. I think the difficult part is understanding where costs come in, right? So it's much, much more difficult to fake revenue than it is to omit costs, right? So I think that's the one thing I always say is like, look at those costs, look at those add backs, make sure those are justified, because that's kind of where if something is going to be hidden, that's where it's going to be hidden. So from a financial perspective, I always say to look at that. And then from an operational perspective, and funny enough, I think you had this individual on your podcast a few weeks ago or something, but she mentioned kind of like the importance of operational due diligence. And we worked on that deal with her. But from an operational perspective, I always say, hey, just ensure that, that there's good SOPs in place, especially if you're buying a business that has been around for a long time, right? So when someone comes in and they say, hey, I found this business, I have it under contract, it's been around for 15 years. So that's amazing, right? There's no way this business can fail. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. There's good longevity here. But the one thing is that if this same owner has been running the business for the past 15 years, like 90% of those operational procedures are in their head and they won't get transferred over as part of like an official transfer process unless you ensure there are SOPs in place and there are processes in place to ensure that as the new owner, you're not going to just try to inherit knowledge from the existing owner's brain. So I think those are two things that definitely come to mind.
So that's fascinating. And it's so critical. And I agree 100% because so many people just think, well, the numbers are the numbers that generates the value of the business. That's how the value of the business is determined. And it's actually only one component. What you're talking about is that I call it the fifth pillar. We've got risk, growth, transferability, and documentation. I guess it's really built into risk. Is everything that can go wrong with the business or can be improved in the business in the owner's head? That's not really transferable. And so you're going to have a longer training and transition period after closing and hold back some money during that training and transition period to then be released to be a carrot so the seller of the business sticks around and make sure that knowledge is transferred. As far as hidden costs, what's the number one thing hidden cost-wise that you've seen people maybe not put in their P&L, or do they actually cheat? I don't know if we've ever. I say ever. I know one deal. We found somebody that did some fraudulent stuff, but it was a $125,000 transaction, which was big for the buyer, big for the seller. We were able to unwind it. But what's the number one thing that people would fake or cheat or do something that you've seen inside of the expenses category?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to clarify, a lot of times this is inadvertent, right? So people like, as you're looking to sell this business, you might put together the P&L, you just forget, right? Like you forget, hey, I spent this much to do this type of marketing at one point and I didn't add it in.
You're right. You're right. It's inadvertent. It's a mistake. I sold Mike Jackness's business, a brilliant entrepreneur, and had a very, very experienced bookkeeping firm. But the bookkeeping firm made a mistake with the currency conversion, and it inflated discretionary earnings by it wasn't much, but by about $3,000. And so we had to adjust in due diligence the price down based upon the multiple times the $3,000. So yeah, what's kind of the number one or two areas where people maybe make mistakes, like you said?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with like marketing where it can't be tied back. So, a lot of times if they're doing like SEO work. So we had one where this individual, they weren't doing any marketing work, so to speak, but essentially what they had was two VAs that would go on specialty forums and post about the business, right? So I guess without revealing too many details, it was car related. It was an e-commerce business that sold car related products. And so the owner had two VAs that were on a bunch of these like car enthusiast forums. And they were just like active participants with their website on the bottom, right? Like on the footer. And so that way, anytime they posted, it would bring back it would bring back folks to the website. This was something that they didn't disclose. And again, I don't know if it was inadvertent. I don't know if it was intentional, but it was something they never disclosed, because to them, it was like, hey, this VA is part of our umbrella of companies. This is not a cost particular to this business. But in reality, that was a business cost, because it was a marketing cost, because that's what was bringing in a majority, or at least a good chunk of users. So that was one. And overall, it's like marketing costs, experimental marketing costs that can't be traced back directly to the business. That's a big one. And then with e-commerce, we'll sometimes see certain cost of goods get kind of omitted. And again, this isn't often, as you said, because most of the deals we do, we also work directly with brokers, right? And that's the thing with brokers, is that a lot of those costs, a lot of those P&Ls, they've been perfected to a degree, right? So we're much less likely to see any of these issues when we go with brokers versus when we do deals that are through private sellers, right? Through private sellers, where they're putting the P&L together. No one's really vetted it or anything like that. So that's also a testament to you guys, right? Because we're much less likely to see these issues come up. But overall, it's like cost of goods sold or parts of cost of goods sold. Obviously, they're not going to omit the whole thing, but like, hey, they're shipping from China to the US and US out to the customer. They'll show the US out to the customer, but they might omit the China, or vice versa, or certain parts of it. So I would say those are typically the two main things.
What do you think of if a client came to you directly and presented P&Ls either on a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis, that's all that was presented? What would your thought or words be back to that person that was buying that business?
So when you say just quarter, like, do you mean just this current quarter?
That all the seller is providing, is
Mm-hmm.
quarterly financials. They're not given month-to-month financials.
Yeah, I don't love that. And I think the only exception to that is that if they've just been around for a long time, because the benefit of monthly financials, right, is you start to see trends and patterns, right? And that's a big deal. So if you have 3 months of, or 3 years of financials on a monthly basis, you now have 36 data points versus quarterly, which now you only have 12 data points, right? And so I think that's the main thing, is that it's much harder for us to figure out what the trends are, what the patterns are. And a lot of the times those trends and patterns indicate strength, growth, but they also help us understand where we can find issues, right? Like if we see a random month out of the year in the last 6 months, that's the RPV is 3 times the average RPV. There's something going on here that I think is at least worth discussing. So I wouldn't love it, but it's not something we've seen a lot, except for businesses that have just been around for a long time and they just do quarterly.
I can't let you get away with saying RPV without telling me what it means, because I don't know.
Sorry. Yeah.
What's it stand
revenue
for?
Right. So revenue per visitor. So it's like when we're looking at like various metrics, and I mean, that was really just an example, but it could be anything where we're looking at metrics across the different months.
Gotcha. Okay. What are the typical packages that people reach out to you for? And again, when should they reach out to you?
Yeah, I have a question around that too. And
sure.
This is before they reach out. I also have like a cool privilege of getting to talk to a lot of these new SBA buyers. Mm-hmm. And, they just got their funds, or they got their loan approved, and they're planning on buying one business. Mm-hmm. And they are, let's say they're buying a smaller size business, so their budget is already limited anyway. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time talking to them sometimes about hiring a due diligence firm, because their philosophy is, I'm just buying one, mm-hmm. and I'm already budget sensitive, and I'd rather apply the due diligence budget for professional services over to the acquisition price, and I know what I'm doing. And the package I got from Quiet Light was so complete. There's a lot of detail here. I've got a 45-minute interview and a P&L and a business summary.
I'm going to jump in and answer this, Ahmed, and then you can answer it as well. So,
sure.
I sold my last e-commerce business through Quiet Light in November of 2010. I took 2011 off, and then I went on the hunt to buy another one, and I bought a content site, and I bought it. It wasn't from Quiet Light. I thought, I'm pretty smart. My e-commerce site was built on content being produced every month. So it was kind of a content site. I got it. I understood that. Well, I'm pretty smart. I just sold a pretty savvy business. I don't need a due diligence firm. Well, it turns out that the site that I bought was built on poor link building practices. And
Ouch.
there were maybe 5 pages that resulted in 90% of the business. And then when you found the links that were, the traffic that was being driven to those pages, they were all completely random, unrelated sites. I bought a business that was in the auto insurance industry, and a couple of the stuff that were driving traffic somehow were porn sites. Well, I got caught up in the Penguin update. So I bought it. I think I closed on March 30th, 2012. And this is a quiz I give to people. And I say I bought a site on March 30th, 2012, and I had 42 amazing days. And then something happened, and all of my page 1 articles went to page 2, and then 3, and then 4. And before too long, I was out, over $200,000. If I had hired Rapid Diligence, you weren't in business at the time, or Centurica, one of the others in the space, I never would have bought that site. You would have said, there's too much traffic coming from these links, and these links have nothing to do with your business. That said, it worked out well because I took on that and joined Quiet Light at the same time, and Quiet Light's worked out okay. But I think you have to, regardless of the size of the business, especially with SBA, when 90% of it is a loan for 10 years, that you should absolutely invest in due diligence and due diligence firms, because of what you're going to learn what to fix in the business as well. But answering questions, Ahmed, yourself, what would you say to folks that say, yeah, no, I could do this myself?
Yeah, no, I think you really got it there, because that's exactly it, right? And I think what that scenario you described with the content site, that would have been a very simple check in terms of like, this is something we do for all content sites, right? Where we see one keyword exposure. So is there any particular set of keyword that results in more than 10% of the organic traffic to your website? And then is there any particular set of backlinks? And then we do like a backlink to referring domain, stuff like that would always end up showing up. So kind of going to that question though, a lot of it, what I say is that, especially if you're a first-time buyer, I understand budgets are tight. I understand that, but I think it's even more critical that you hire a professional firm, right? Because when you're a portfolio buyer, or if you're a PE fund and this $1 million acquisition is 5% of your portfolio, it's no longer an existential issue, right? It's just a part of a much larger portfolio. You can afford to make a riskier decision and either, not hire a due diligence firm or just buy a more riskier business. But when you're buying that first business, in order for you to buy the second business and ultimately build out that portfolio, which is, a lot of the folks that come to us, that's kind of their ultimate goal. If your ultimate goal is to either just have that business succeed or go to that second, third, or fourth one, you have to get the first one right? Like, you have to give yourself the best fighting chance. And the only way you're going to do that is ensuring that you have the right people on your team, but then also obviously sticking to the correct principles, right? Like sticking to your investment thesis, going after businesses that, that work with your strengths, right? That work with your background and stuff like that. So I would say it's even more critical to reach out and have the right people on your team, because otherwise, there's not going to be a portfolio of businesses.
Exactly. Once you take a certain amount of your funds, especially if it's family funds and you're married, whether you're a husband or wife buying the business, if you screw it up, your spouse is probably going to be really reserved in allowing you to do it again. So you do want to get that first one right, so that you can build that portfolio.
Exactly. And that example you gave was fantastic, because I've actually been in the same shoes myself. So when I first was buying businesses just by myself, they were a bit small, on the smaller end. This was 8-9 years ago. I was buying smaller, like sub 50, sub 60K businesses. And again, the online business space, the world was a bit different back then. You could find a lot of business at this price point. We started a small cap PE fund and bought an e-commerce business that was well into, I think it was like $500,000 or something for our first one. And there were components of that business that I had never dealt with. There was a physical component, they had a warehouse, all of these things. And I was like, hey, I've done this a ton of times, right? I've bought a bunch of businesses. I'm smart. I can figure this out. I don't need to hire someone. And really, I wish I did, because it would have saved me a lot of headache, because of the things we found out afterward, that wasn't, I wish I had known when I bought the business, I would have paid differently for it. I might have never bought it in the first place. So it's one of those things where like, it sucks. I know it's not cheap, right? Like good due diligence isn't cheap. It's time consuming. We spend a lot of man hours working on these deals. So it's not cheap. And I completely understand that. But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, you either pay now or you're going to pay many times over, a year from now. And like the choice is yours. So I think that's the way I look at it. And funny enough, if I were to buy a business again, I would also do that. I would consult either my own firm or like other firms and make sure that process is beyond myself as well. Because there's also that emotional component too, right? We become enamored by these businesses that we've spent the last 3 months looking at, and you need someone to come in there and objectively say, hey, this is a good decision, or this isn't a good, or here are your risks and opportunities.
Yeah. One of the things that we say in my house, or actually it's just me that says it because I'm me. I say, I got this. And it's become a joke in our house because generally when I say I got this, it means I don't. And I'm smart enough to know that I don't. My wife knows that. I said that when I bought the business. And I hope to never say it again. Yeah, Deanna's laughing. She knows me well. I do the same thing, Ahmed. Look, I sold, personally over $100 million worth of transactions with QuietLight. We're approaching, $1 billion in closed transactions. If I were going to buy a content SaaS e-commerce business, anything, I would absolutely hire due diligence, right? There's just no question about it. And as I'm looking at one of your reports, folks listening, we're talking about CPA review of all financial statements, unlimited customer support, assessment of web traffic, 25 plus tests to identify risk, opportunity and growth analysis. And look at this, review supplier agreements. That's kind of important, wouldn't you say? All of it is just critical stuff, valuable critical stuff. So I don't know how much we could drill this into folks' head, but if you're buying a business, get it done. Let me actually, very few people do this, but if they're selling a very large business, at least 8 figures, I've seen some people pay for due diligence to see what's wrong with their business and then fix it, right? It's part of that opportunity and growth analysis. But they're not selling right away. They're generally selling in 12 to 24 months. Have you had anybody come to you that's on the sell side that says, tell me what's wrong?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's certainly not common, right? I would say it's less than 5%, not even of our deals where we represent sellers or we have sell side due diligence, but we have done this. So we have we'll do a sell side quality of earnings, right? So where we'll go in there, we'll assess both the business from an operational perspective, but the financials as well. And the biggest benefit to that is that we can then put everything together. We can clean it up. We can make the financials look really nice and kind of make sure that they're accurate. And then we can work with the seller when they're looking to sell that business. And usually a lot of these folks are doing it privately. If they'll reach out and they want something from a sell side due diligence perspective, they might be looking to go privately. They might be looking to go with the broker, but we'll essentially be able to represent them throughout that deal. So it's not common, but we've certainly done it.
Gotcha. All right, Deanna, any last questions before we wrap this up?
Yeah, Ahmed. So tell us a little more just about your sweet spot. I know you're e-commerce, I know you're SaaS, I know you're in all the different verticals, but do you have a sweet spot in terms of deal size or age of business? Just so I can kind of make sure we're talking around the same circle. We can send people back and forth to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of our sweet spot is essentially what we call online, right? So it's like, hey, anything like e-commerce content, SaaS, anything that we can, trace the traffic and the foot traffic back to an online presence. And then in terms of size, we've done a lot of deals under $1 million as well. I think over the last year, so we've kind of moved into slightly larger deals, but most of the deals we work with are anywhere from $2 to $8 to $10 million. We've done larger, we've done smaller, but any online business, again, SaaS, e-commerce content works. And then I think you asked us earlier about when should clients approach us or when is that sweet spot in terms of hey, is it just after LOI? So we have 2 separate offerings, right? So one is where I would say 70% of our deals come in where someone has an LOI signed and they'll come to us and they want due diligence on that particular deal. And then we also have what we call our start to finish plan, which is where clients will come to us. They've been searching for a deal for like the past 6 months, year, and they need a bit more help and they're still in that search phase. So they'll come to us and they'll say, hey, I kind of need help with finding the right business. And I want kind of buy-side advisory even before that LOI is signed. So we'll bring them into our start to finish plan, which is a bit more comprehensive. And I would say almost all of the folks that come on that plan are first or second time buyers, and they just want that additional support along the way.
So you're talking about, so tell me one last couple key points on your buy side search services. Because I get a lot of requests for people that can't find that one business. They're just buying one. So how deep do you go in the search?
Yeah, so we go fairly deep, and I think so a lot of those clients that are coming in, they do need help with search, and then some of them just need help with buy-side advisory as a whole, right? Like, how do I even know which business to bring under LOI? So it's like this, it's more of like a much more supportive process from the start. So I know like the folks at Acquisition Lab, they kind of do a similar thing where they're kind of helping even before that LOI stage. But our search side, we go as deep as online businesses, so we can't help with, hey, if you're looking for like an HVAC business in Southern Florida, we can't help with that. But anything like if you're looking for an e-commerce content SaaS, we can definitely help with that.
Very cool.
I can't let the mention of the Acquisition Lab go without commenting. Folks, y'all know that Walker Dybel, one of the most handsome advisors on the Quiet Light team.
He cut his hair. No, he cut his hair. He was way hotter with long hair.
You liked it? His long hair? I thought he looked like an overweight older Tarzan that had become domesticated. Walker is the best-selling author. Now he's the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of Buy Then Build, and that has morphed into the Acquisition Lab. And they have cohorts at the Acquisition Lab where they bring a fixed amount of buyers in on a quarterly basis to go through a full training program on how to negotiate and acquire all sorts of businesses, not just online businesses. You can go to acquisitionlab.com or buythenbuild.com. I don't have any photos when he's looking like the older Tarzan, but you can listen to a podcast we did a month or two ago. Really quick, embarrassing story. Walker, he's kind of like a mini celebrity at this point, Ahmed. And he actually, on the podcast, we talk about it. He was in the men's room at a urinal, and I hate urinals where they, it's like a very thin little barrier between and somebody else stands beside you. Somebody walks up, unzips his pants, goes to the bathroom, looks over and goes, "Hey, aren't you Walker Dybel?" I'm like, this is not when you want to be recognized.
I love it. One of the first times I'm on your cast, you dip into potty talk. I feel like I just...
We dip into potty talk.
That's awesome.
Much as we can. This is great. Ahmed, thank you. It's great to have you on the podcast, looking to helping your business grow and helping our clients use your services. Deanna's right there with you as she's talking to a lot of buyers on our team or that come to us, and she'll refer folks over as well. How does an audience member reach you? What's the best approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to rapiddiligence.com, you can book a free intro call. That's just our consultation call. It's not a sales call. It's really just there to understand like, hey, where you're at in your buying journey, what we can help with. I mean, we have folks that'll reach out, a year before they think they're going to make an acquisition. And we have folks reach out 2 weeks after they've already signed the LOI. So if you are at any point considering it, please reach out. It's always good to at least have that discussion. You can always email me as well at Ahmed, AHMED at rapiddiligence.com.
Okay, so we got the email address and rapiddiligence.com. Awesome.
That's right.
Ahmed, thanks for joining us on the Quiet Light podcast. Look forward to staying connected as the years pass by.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me.